The air in Madison Square Garden was electric that evening in December 1970. The anticipation buzzed through the crowd like a living current, sweeping from the ringside seats where celebrities and boxing royalty sat shoulder to shoulder, all the way up to the nosebleed section, where ordinary fans who had saved for months just to be present strained their necks for a better view. This wasn't just any fight night. This was Muhammad Ali's return. 3 years. That's how long the world had been deprived of seeing the self-proclaimed greatest of all time in the ring. 3 years since the Boxing Commission had stripped him of his heavyweight title and his license to box for refusing military induction during the Vietnam War. 3 years of Ali, then still widely known as Cassius Clay, fighting a different kind of battle, not with his fists, but with his principles, his faith, and the legal system of the United States. "And I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he had famously declared, a statement that transformed him from a celebrated athlete into a polarizing symbol of the anti-war movement. It had cost him everything at the peak of his career, his title, his income, and nearly 4 years of his prime fighting days. But now, after a Supreme Court victory that overturned his conviction for draft evasion, Muhammad Ali was back. At 28 years old, he was still magnificent to behold, tall, lithe, and radiating the same magnetic confidence that had made him not just a boxer, but a cultural phenomenon. As he made his way toward the ring, the crowd's reaction was a tempest of emotions, thunderous cheers from his supporters, mixed with jeers from those who still viewed him as a draft dodger, a traitor. Ali seemed to absorb it all, his face impassive but his eyes alert, taking in every detail of this moment he had fought so hard to reclaim. His opponent that night was Jerry Quarry, a tough, determined fighter with a reputation for absorbing punishment and delivering it in equal measure. The bookmakers had Quarry as the favorite. How could they not? Ali had been inactive for years while Quarry had been steadily climbing the heavyweight ranks. In his dressing room before the fight, Ali sat quietly while his trainer, Angelo Dundee, wrapped his hands with the methodical precision of a ritual they had performed hundreds of times before. "How you feeling, champ?" Dundee asked, his voice low and steady as he wound the gauze between Ali's fingers. "Like I never left," Ali replied, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The people out there think Jerry Quarry's gonna teach Muhammad Ali a lesson tonight. But they don't know what I know. They don't know that you can take a man's title, you can take his money, but you can't take his belief in himself." Dundee nodded, having witnessed firsthand the unshakable self-belief that had carried Ali through his exile. "Just remember, stick to the plan. Quarry's gonna come at you hard, trying to wear you down. He thinks you're rusty." "Rusty?" Ali's eyebrows shot up in mock indignation. "Angelo, I'm stainless steel, baby. I don't rust." The small group of people in the dressing room, cornermen, sparring partners, and a few close friends laughed, relieved to see that the old Ali, the one with the quick wit and quicker hands, was still very much present. But among them was Howard Bingham, Ali's longtime friend and photographer, who noticed something else in the champion's eyes. A depth, a seriousness that hadn't been there before his forced hiatus. The years away from the ring had changed Ali in ways that weren't immediately apparent to those who only knew his public persona. When the call came to make their way to the ring, Ali stood, rolling his shoulders and bouncing lightly on his toes. He looked at the faces around him, men who had stood by him when many others had abandoned him, and said simply, "Let's go remind the world who Muhammad Ali is." The walk to the ring was a gauntlet of noise and emotion. Some reached out to touch him as he passed, as if to confirm that this wasn't some collective hallucination, that Muhammad Ali was indeed back among them. Others turned their backs or shouted insults, still bitter about his stance against the war. a war that was still raging halfway across the world and tearing America apart at home. Ali climbed through the ropes with the fluid grace that had always been his trademark and moved immediately to the center of the ring, arms raised in his characteristic pose of victory before the battle had even begun. Across from him, Jerry Quarry waited, compact and powerful, his face set with grim determination. He had no intention of being merely a footnote in the story of Muhammad Ali's comeback. As the referee called them to the center for instructions, the two fighters locked eyes. Quarry's gaze was intense, focused, revealing nothing but the disciplined mind of a professional preparing for combat. Ali's, however, held something unexpected, a flicker of recognition, almost like seeing an old friend after a long absence. Not Quarry specifically, but the ring itself, the ropes, the canvas, the bright lights, and the roaring crowd. This was where he belonged. This was home. The bell rang, and for the first time in 3.5 years, Muhammad Ali stepped forward to meet an opponent in the squared circle, ready to reclaim what he had never, in his heart, relinquished. If this story has already made you feel something, no matter how small, don't leave without giving back. Comment and tell me where you're watching this video from, and subscribe to the channel. 5 years after his triumphant return to boxing, Muhammad Ali was no longer fighting to prove he still belonged in the ring. Now, he was fighting to prove he was still the greatest. The rumble in the jungle against George Foreman in Zaire had shocked the world when Ali reclaimed the heavyweight championship with his rope-a-dope strategy, absorbing Foreman's punishing blows until the younger, stronger champion exhausted himself. The thriller in Manila against Joe Frazier had been a brutal war of attrition that pushed both men to their absolute limits, with Ali later saying it was the closest thing to death he had ever experienced. Now, in 1975, a different kind of fight awaited him, one that would reveal more about the man than any championship bout ever could. The charity exhibition had been arranged months in advance, part of a fundraising tour for children's hospitals that Ali had committed to between his professional fights. It was scheduled to take place in a modest community center in Philadelphia, far from the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas or Madison Square Garden. No title was on the line, no purse to be won. Just an opportunity for people to see the heavyweight champion of the world up close, and for Ali to give back to a cause he deeply believed in. The event had been sold out for weeks, with locals eager to catch a glimpse of the man whose face adorned magazine covers, whose voice rang out from television screens, and whose words were quoted in newspapers around the world. They didn't expect a real fight. Exhibition matches were known to be carefully choreographed affairs designed to showcase the fighters' skills without any real danger, but they would get to see Muhammad Ali, and that alone was worth the price of admission. Ali arrived at the venue without his usual entourage, just Angelo Dundee, his longtime trainer, and Howard Bingham, who chronicled Ali's life both in and out of the ring through his camera lens. Ali was subdued, almost contemplative, as he prepared for what was supposed to be a light workout rather than a serious contest. "Who's the opponent tonight, Angelo?" Ali asked as Dundee helped him with his gloves. "Local amateur heavyweight," Dundee replied. "Former Golden Gloves champion named Michael Edwards. Good kid from what I hear. Works as a janitor at the hospital we're raising money for." "They thought it would make a nice story." Ali nodded, thinking about how different this was from the high-stakes, high-pressure championship fights he was accustomed to. There was something pure about it, something that reminded him of why he had fallen in love with boxing in the first place, long before the titles and the fame. When Ali emerged from the dressing room, the community center erupted in cheers. The space was small enough that even those in the back rows could clearly see his face, the light dancing off his smooth skin, his eyes bright with the same mischievous intelligence that had made him as famous for his words as for his fists. He climbed into the makeshift ring set up in the center of the basketball court and began his customary pre-fight routine, shadowboxing, dancing on his toes, throwing combinations at invisible opponents while the crowd gasped and applauded at the speed and fluidity of his movements, even in practice. And then Michael Edwards appeared. He was a big man, though not as tall as Ali, with broad shoulders and powerful arms. But what struck Ali immediately was not the man's physique but his face, open, earnest, with a touch of nervousness but also unmistakable excitement. This was clearly the biggest moment of his boxing life. The two men met in the center of the ring for instructions from the referee. Up close, Ali noticed something else about Edwards, a slight hesitation in his movements, a careful way of positioning himself that suggested he was compensating for something. "Honor to meet you, champ," Edwards said, his voice betraying his awe despite his attempt to sound casual. "Been watching you since I was a kid." Ali smiled, recognizing the familiar mix of reverence and determination in the younger man's eyes. "Good to meet you too, brother. Let's give these people a show, all right?" Edwards nodded, and they touched gloves before returning to their corners. The bell rang, and the exhibition began. For the first minute, it went exactly as everyone expected. Ali moved gracefully around the ring, putting on a display of footwork and hand speed, occasionally throwing light jabs that Edwards gamely tried to slip or block. The crowd oohed and ahed, appreciating the chance to see the champion's legendary skills up close. But then, something changed. As Edwards moved forward to throw a combination, Ali noticed a pronounced limp in his right leg. Not the kind of temporary issue caused by a twisted ankle or a Charlie horse, but something more permanent. The realization hit Ali suddenly. Michael Edwards had a disability, possibly from birth or an old injury, that affected his mobility. In that moment, the exhibition shifted in Ali's mind. This wasn't just a young local boxer getting the opportunity of a lifetime to share a ring with the heavyweight champion. This was a man who had overcome significant physical challenges to become a Golden Gloves champion, who worked daily at a hospital helping others despite his own difficulties, and who now stood before Ali not seeking pity or special treatment, but simply the dignity of being treated as an equal in the ring. Ali adjusted his approach immediately, not by taking it easier on Edwards, that would have been the ultimate disrespect, but by engaging with him more earnestly, turning what could have been a mere performance into a genuine, if friendly, contest. He parried Edwards' punches with precision rather than flashy movements, countered with controlled shots that tested the younger man's defenses without overwhelming him, and nodded in acknowledgement when Edwards managed to land a solid blow. From his corner, Angelo Dundee watched with a knowing smile. This was the side of Ali that the public rarely saw, the man beneath the bravado, the compassion behind the confidence. Howard Bingham's camera captured it all. The respect in Ali's eyes, the growing confidence in Edwards as he realized the champion was treating him as a worthy opponent, and the audience's gradual understanding that they were witnessing something more meaningful than they had anticipated. As the final round began, Ali caught a glimpse of a group of children seated near the ring, patients from the hospital, some in wheelchairs, others bearing visible signs of their illnesses or treatments. Their eyes were fixed on Michael Edwards, watching him move around the ring with Muhammad Ali, their faces alight with the possibility that his example represented. In that moment, Muhammad Ali, the man who had made a career of predicting which round he would knock out his opponents, the man who had taunted and teased his way through press conferences and weigh-ins, the man who had proclaimed himself the greatest before the world was ready to acknowledge it, made a decision that had nothing to do with winning or losing, but everything to do with the true meaning of greatness. The final round of the exhibition bout was underway, and the atmosphere in the small community center had transformed. What had begun as a simple charity event, a chance for locals to see the legendary Muhammad Ali in person, had evolved into something far more significant. The audience, which had initially come expecting entertainment, now watched with a deeper appreciation, sensing that they were witnessing something authentic and unexpected. Michael Edwards, despite his physical limitation, was boxing the round of his life. Inspired by Ali's respectful engagement, he had shed his initial nervousness and was fighting with skill and heart, his combinations crisp, his movements as fluid as his condition allowed. For his part, Ali was responding in kind, no longer simply performing but genuinely boxing, albeit with the measured control of a champion who knew exactly how hard he could push without turning the exhibition into something it wasn't meant to be. Midway through the round, Edwards launched a well-timed overhand right that caught Ali on the shoulder, a glancing blow, but one thrown with genuine intent. Ali nodded in appreciation and fired back with a quick three-punch combination that Edwards partially blocked. The crowd cheered at the exchange, invested now in the competitive spirit that had emerged between the two men. It was then that an opportunity presented itself, the kind that, in a professional bout, Ali would have exploited without hesitation. Edwards, perhaps tiring or simply caught in a moment of overconfidence, dropped his left hand slightly as he moved forward. Ali saw the opening for a straight right hand, a punch that, even thrown with restraint, would have likely staggered Edwards and possibly ended the exhibition in dramatic fashion. Time seemed to slow down for Ali as he processed the situation. His fighter's instinct, honed through years of competitive boxing at the highest level, urged him to take the opening. It would be the expected move, the one consistent with his reputation as a brilliant tactician who never missed an opportunity to dominate an opponent. The crowd would roar. It would be the exclamation point on the evening's entertainment, but something held him back. In that split second, Ali saw not just Michael Edwards the boxer, but Michael Edwards the man, the hospital worker who, despite his own physical challenges, devoted his life to helping sick children, the former Golden Gloves champion who had earned his place in this ring not through fame or connections, but through perseverance and courage, the opponent who was fighting not for money or glory, but for the pure love of the sport and the chance to share the ring with his idol. And beyond Edwards, Ali saw the children from the hospital, their eyes wide with wonder and hope, seeing in Edwards a reflection of their own potential to overcome obstacles. What message would it send to them if Ali exploited Edwards' momentary vulnerability? What story would they take away from this night? In that moment of clarity, Muhammad Ali, the man who had built his career on being unpredictable, on floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee, did something no one expected. He didn't throw the punch. Instead, he subtly shifted his weight, moving just enough to let the moment pass, to allow Edwards to recover his defensive position without ever knowing how close he had come to being on the receiving end of Ali's legendary right hand. The decision happened so quickly that few in the audience noticed it. Angelo Dundee noticed, of course. Very little about boxing escaped his experienced eye. Howard Bingham noticed too, his camera capturing the moment of decision on Ali's face. But to most observers, it simply appeared that the exhibition was continuing as before, with both men exchanging punches in a display of skill and sportsmanship. As the round progressed, however, Ali's restraint became more apparent to those who knew him best. He was boxing beautifully, showcasing his defensive genius, his footwork, his hand speed, all the attributes that had made him champion, but he was deliberately not exploiting openings that would have allowed him to dominate Edwards. Instead, he was creating a space in which Edwards could shine, could demonstrate his own considerable skills without being overshadowed. It wasn't that Ali was taking it easy on Edwards. That would have been a form of condescension that a man like Edwards would have sensed and resented. Rather, Ali was engaging with him as an equal, with genuine respect, adjusting his own performance not to highlight Edwards' limitations, but to acknowledge his abilities. The final bell rang, and the two men embraced in the center of the ring. The audience applauded enthusiastically, appreciating the display of boxing skill they had witnessed. But as Ali raised Edwards' hand in a gesture of shared victory, something unexpected happened. Edwards, overcome with emotion, began to speak to Ali, his words inaudible to the crowd, but clearly intense and heartfelt. Ali listened, his usual animated expression giving way to something more solemn, more moved. Then, to everyone's surprise, he took the microphone that had been brought into the ring for the expected post-exhibition comments. "I want to thank my brother Michael Edwards for sharing this ring with me tonight," Ali began, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent community center. "I fought the biggest names in boxing, Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, but I've rarely faced someone with the heart this man showed tonight." Edwards stood beside him, visibly emotional but standing tall, his dignity intact. "Michael just told me something I didn't know," Ali continued. "He told me that when he was 10 years old, doctors told his family he might never walk properly, let alone become an athlete. They said his condition would limit what he could do in life." The audience was completely still now, hanging on Ali's every word. "But look at him now." Ali's voice grew more passionate. "Golden Gloves champion, working at the Children's Hospital, helping kids who are fighting their own battles. And tonight, stepping into the ring with the heavyweight champion of the world and showing he belongs here." Ali turned to face Edwards directly. "Oh, you know what that makes you in my book? That makes you the real champion in this ring tonight." The crowd erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Some were wiping away tears, moved by the genuine emotion of the moment and the unexpected depth of what they had witnessed. What had begun as a simple exhibition had transformed into a powerful statement about courage, respect, and the true meaning of championship beyond titles and belts. As the applause continued, Ali noticed the group of children from the hospital. One boy in particular caught his attention, no more than 8 years old, thin from illness, seated in a wheelchair, but with eyes shining with newfound hope as he looked at Michael Edwards. In that child's face, Ali saw the real impact of what had transpired in the ring, not just entertainment, not just charity, but inspiration. A seed of possibility planted that might grow into something life-changing. It was in that moment that Muhammad Ali, known throughout his career for his bold predictions and larger-than-life persona, understood with perfect clarity why he had been drawn to this small community center in Philadelphia, why he had chosen restraint over dominance, and why this exhibition, which would never appear in the official record of his boxing career, might be one of the most important fights he would ever engage in. The story of Muhammad Ali's exhibition bout with Michael Edwards might have remained a cherished memory for those who witnessed it firsthand, a small footnote in the champion's illustrious career, had it not been for what happened in the months and years that followed. Howard Bingham's photographs of that evening made their way into a small feature in a sports magazine. Not the dramatic action shots that typically accompanied coverage of Ali's professional fights, but more intimate images. Ali listening intently as Edwards spoke to him after the final bell, the champion raising the local boxer's hand, the children from the hospital watching with expressions of wonder and inspiration. The accompanying article, though brief, captured the essence of what had transpired that night, focusing not on the technical aspects of the exhibition, but on the human story behind it. The piece might have been forgotten among the constant stream of news about Ali's professional career, except that it caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who had been following Ali's life outside the ring, his social activism, his religious faith, his connection to communities often overlooked by celebrities of his stature. The filmmaker reached out to Michael Edwards, now working as a physical therapy assistant at the same hospital, inspired by his own experience to help others with mobility challenges. Edwards agreed to be interviewed, and on camera, he revealed what he had whispered to Ali in the ring that night, not just about his childhood diagnosis, which Ali had shared with the audience, but about the impact Ali had on his life long before they ever met. "When I was a kid dealing with my condition, feeling different, feeling limited, Muhammad Ali came into my life through a tiny black and white TV in my parents' living room," Edwards explained, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Here was this man who wasn't just a boxer, but a force of nature, who told the world he was the greatest, even when the world wasn't ready to hear it. "He taught me that the strongest muscle you have is your mind and your heart, not your legs or your arms. He showed me that how other people see you doesn't define who you are or what you can become." Edwards paused, collecting himself before continuing. "So when I was in that ring with him, and I realized that he was treating me not as a charity case, not as someone with a disability, but as a boxer worthy of his respect, it was the most validating moment of my life. And then, afterward, when I told him what he had meant to me growing up, he didn't just nod and move on. He listened, really listened. And then he used his voice. That famous Muhammad Ali voice that the whole world pays attention to make sure everyone in that room knew my story." The documentary, when it was released, included footage from the exhibition that Howard Bingham had captured on a small handheld camera, grainy and imperfect, but powerful in its authenticity. Boxing analysts who viewed it immediately recognized the moment Ali had chosen not to throw the right hand when Edwards left himself open, understanding the conscious restraint it represented from a fighter known for his killer instinct in the ring. But it was the epilogue to the story that transformed it from a touching anecdote to a defining moment in understanding Ali's character. 6 months after the exhibition, the Children's Hospital launched a new rehabilitation program specifically designed for young patients with mobility issues, inspired by Michael Edwards' Journey from Patient to Golden Gloves Champion. The program's first honorary visitor, who spent hours talking with the children, demonstrating shadow boxing techniques they could practice even from hospital beds, and listening to their own stories of challenges and dreams, was Muhammad Ali. What no one knew at the time, what wouldn't become clear until years later, was that Ali himself was beginning to experience the earliest symptoms of the Parkinson's disease that would eventually rob him of the physical grace and verbal dexterity that had been his hallmarks. As he moved among those children, his body already harboring the beginnings of the condition that would become his most visible opponent, he was demonstrating a truth he had articulated throughout his career. True greatness transcends physical prowess. The relationship between Ali and Edwards continued over the years. When Ali's condition became public knowledge, it was Edwards who reached out, now in a position to offer the champion insights from his lifetime of adapting to physical limitations. Their roles had reversed in some ways, with Edwards becoming a source of guidance and support for the man who had once inspired him. In 1996, when Muhammad Ali lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta, his hand visibly trembling from the effects of Parkinson's, Michael Edwards was among those watching from the stands, accompanied by 3 teenagers from the hospital program, all of whom had gone from believing their physical conditions would limit their lives to pursuing athletic and personal goals inspired by both Ali's public courage and Edwards' personal example. The story came full circle in 2001, when a sports network producing a documentary on Ali's life outside boxing interviewed Edwards, now the director of the rehabilitation program at the hospital. They asked him about that night in 1975, about the moment when Ali had chosen not to throw that right hand. People often misunderstand what happened, Edwards explained. Now a middle-aged man with grey at his temples, but the same clear, direct gaze. And they think Ali was being charitable by not knocking me down when he had the chance. But that's not what made the moment special. What Ali gave me wasn't charity, it was dignity. He could have embarrassed me to make himself look good. Instead, he chose to honor my effort and my heart. Edwards smiled, remembering, that's the thing about true greatness. It doesn't need to diminish others to prove itself. And that's the lesson Ali taught everyone who was there that night, that sometimes the greatest strength is shown not in what you do, but in what you choose not to do. The documentary aired just months before Ali made one of his final major public appearances at the opening of the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville. Though his ability to speak was severely limited by then, his eyes still communicated the intelligence and compassion that had always defined him beyond his athletic achievements. In the center's interactive exhibits chronicling his life and legacy, visitors could find a small display about the exhibition in Philadelphia, a reminder that some of life's most significant moments happen not under the brightest lights or on the biggest stages, but in small community centers where great souls recognize each other's inherent dignity. Years later, when Ali passed away in 2016, among the thousands who came to pay their respects was Michael Edwards, now retired but still volunteering with the program he had helped create. He brought with him a faded photograph from that night in 1975, not of the boxing exhibition itself, but of what happened afterward. Ali surrounded by children from the hospital, including the boy in the wheelchair whose eyes had caught Ali's attention. In the photo, Ali was kneeling to be at eye level with the child, both of them smiling with a joy that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. As the world mourned Muhammad Ali, the boxer, the activist, the cultural icon, Michael Edwards honored the man who had understood that true greatness lies not in the power to strike down an opponent, but in the wisdom to know when to hold back, and in doing so, to lift others up. If you've made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing. I tell these stories with my heart in my hand, to reach people like you, who feel, who get emotional, who live. If this truly touched you, give back, comment, subscribe. Come be part of this family with me until the next video.